We made this.
Engage!
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
There are times, sir, when men of good conscience cannot blindly follow orders.
What we leave behind is not as important as how we've lived.
I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. Make it so.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Make It So, a dedicated Star Trek Picard podcast on the We Made This podcast network. I am one of your hosts, I was going to say Kurt North then. I'm actually Tony Black. And with me is Kurt North. Shall we just swap? Shall we just flip it round, you know?
I think we need to do some. Maybe, well, we could just get a golem and just use it each.
Yeah, like a body transfer, like a mind consciousness transfer.
Yeah.
And then I can try and talk in a northeast accent, and then now you've got to do Brummy. Good luck with this. Have a go.
Oh, hang on. I don't know, though. I'm not good with accents.
Wow. If guys, we need to make sure Kurt doesn't try and do any alien cultures from Star Trek, because if he can't even nail a Brummy, I mean,
I'm from Dudley. That's about as good as I'm going to get.
That's a bit better.
And stand corrected, it's northwest, not northeast.
Sorry, my bad. I do stand corrected. Northwest.
I've got to be the right north, because obviously, if you've got Romulans in the north, you've got to have the right north.
Exactly. Yeah, we got to get the right part of the location, haven't we? Yeah, we're not just going to spend an hour doing accents, guys. We're going to do a roundup of the first season of Star Trek Picard, because hopefully you'll have been with us for the 10-episode run and the couple of extra bonus episodes we've done on the book, The Last Best Hope, and speaking to Una McCormack, which was a lot of fun. So we've gone through the entire season now. We've reached the end, and we wanted to do a little bit of a capper on there and come back together to talk about what we think about Picard. Now we've seen all of it, and we've been able to digest the beginning to the end of what seems to be a fairly complete told story. So we're going to talk through, we're going to do a season rating, we're going to talk through the characters, we're going to get some feedback from you guys from the Make It So Facebook group, which is great. So we're going to talk a bit through what you thought about the season, and then we're going to do some theorising maybe about season 2 and what we hope we might see in the next set of adventures for Jean-Luc Picard and crew. But and then we're going to talk a little bit about where we're going to go, from here, because the journey's not over with Picard. We're not taking a break or anything. We're going to keep going. So we're going to talk about where next for Make It So and what we're going to transform into, like a golem, basically, and keep ourselves going. Firstly, I just want to thank everybody really who have been involved and who've been listening. We've had some great feedback. We've had some lovely ratings on Apple Podcasts, which I would encourage anyone who listens to try and go and do. That would help us a bunch if you could give us a rating and a review if you can. That would be fantastic. Such as people like Mark R. Pollard, who said, I love this in-depth review of the show. It includes fab guests and a top vibe. Keep up the great work. I think he's from the Picard Talk podcast gangs. That's another Picard podcast you might want to go and seek out. So thanks very much for that. Freedom 410 said, it's a great discussion with balanced perspectives. I appreciate that the hosts bring a balanced perspective to this show. They're clearly Star Trek fans and are enjoying the show, but also aren't afraid to point out some issues. The podcast contains a mix of discussion and speculation about future episodes. Well, thank you, because we try and be as balanced as we can. We don't want it to just be a complete love fest, and at the same time we don't want it to just be a complete this is rubbish, because that's who wants to listen to that at the end of the day. And finally, Mark Adams 123, one of our fellow hosts on the We Made This podcast network, actually says, I was looking forward to Picard so much, and I love this podcast to accompany it. I find myself looking forward to the deep and expert analysis it offers almost as much as I look forward to the next episode of Picard. So that's lovely. Thank you, Mark. And if you want to add your voice to that chorus, we'd be over the moon. So please do go and do that on Apple Podcasts. So thank you very much. And I'd just like to also thank the guests we've had on from the beginning. So who've been joining you and I for many of these episodes. So that's Clara Cook, Duncan Barrett, Craig McKenzie, twice for Craig, because he helped us out of a jam. Zach Moore, Lee Hutchison, Brandy Jackala, and Amy Nelson, and Darren Mooney, who you heard in the last episode, or as we've been talking about on the Facebook group, Data. because we're pretty certain now that if Data was a podcaster, he would be Darren Mooney, and I think we mean that as a compliment, Kurt, don't we? Really,
we do. He's a wealth of information, which I just find that everything we talk about, because we talk about him in other shows as well, that his knowledge is just second to none, and how he keeps it in his brain and manages to keep all the themes and everything on top of that as well is just incredible.
Well, it's because he's a synthetic. This is it now. He's an android.
It makes sense now. It all makes sense.
It does all make sense. He's always been an android, so But yeah, every guest we've had on have been fantastic. So thank you so much to you guys for coming on the show. And you'll hear, though, many of them back next for the next journey of what we're doing, and hopefully some new guests as well. So yeah, let's dive in then and talk about Picard as a season. So why don't we do season rankings then to start off with, Kurt? What would you give Star Trek Picard season 1 out of 10, and what did you think of the season generally?
I would say, I was looking at the episodes this morning and just going kind of just jumping through them and having a look and seeing what I actually thought overall. But I would give it a good 8. I think it has its moments, but the back end of the season is really good. I think when you get to the Impossible Box, that little 3-piece run of Impossible Box, Nepenthe and Broken Pieces are really solid. I really enjoyed them, and obviously the first part, the Remembrance, and obviously the very end is kind of the strongest elements for me, I think, and all together that they really form a cohesive story, which I really enjoy. There's obviously things that we'll get into with characters and the like, which aren't really well drawn or with a certain element, which could be possibly the worst Trek moment ever. But and I'm thinking, which one I'm talking about.
I do.
But overall, I think as just a general feeling, I think it's been really solid. I've enjoyed the journey. I've enjoyed the way that they've put the parts together, and it made me want to come back every week, which is always a good sign when you're wanting to see what happens as soon as possible. Literally as soon as it becomes available, I'm trying to get my viewing goggles on and watch the episode, which always is a good sign.
I think really it has been an interesting season in terms of where it's ended up. You talk about some of the stuff at the end of the season, which is a little bit more assured. I feel like it grew into itself as the season went on to some extent, but I don't think it entirely got there. I am going to go for between a 6.5 and a 7, a bit lower than you, because I feel a little bit on the fence about it all, if I'm honest. And I should come out at the start and say I've really enjoyed the whole process. I've loved doing this podcast, I have to say, going through it week by week. And I know I've not been on all of them, and you and I have taken turns and stuff, but even the weeks I haven't been on talking about it, I've been watching it as soon as I've got home, and I've listened to the podcast, and it's been great to engage with it and have the Facebook group and the Twitter where we've been talking about it week by week. It's been brilliant. It's been the first show I've done that with probably since the X-Files came back, actually, a couple of years ago. So it's been, and the first Star Trek show I've done that forever, actually, because I didn't really do this with Discovery when it came back on. I was on Twitter and stuff and everything, but I wasn't following it this intensely and this religiously. So it's been a really fun experience, and it's made the whole thing even better. But I think there's been the fan brain of me, which has lapped up certain things throughout the season, and there's then been the critical brain of me, which unfortunately I cannot switch off. I just can't do that. I can't do it. It's partly a bit of my bread and butter in what I do. And I can't just look, and I in a way, I envy anyone listening to this who is a dyed-in-the-wool Star Trek fan, or even somebody who is fairly new to it all and just purely loves it and doesn't see any of the flaws or anything like that. I envy you in a way, because I feel like you have a pure enjoyment of something that I just can't quite reach. So throughout watching bits of this, I did find myself at points feeling like I wished the writing was better, that I wish some of the plotting was stronger, that I wish that some of the characters had been better thought through. And I did find myself at points frustrated. And it really does feel like a season of two halves, in that I agree. I think from the Impossible Box onwards, it kicks into a different gear for me as well. I think at that point, when they start to really pull the trigger on much of the arc, it starts great. That first episode, Remembrance, I really, really liked, and I still think it's one of the best episodes of the season. And then it takes a little bit of takes the gear off, takes the pressure off. I was really interested to hear Darren, who we mentioned earlier, say that Absolute Candor was his favourite episode of the season, because it's probably my second least favourite, for a couple of different things. But it was interesting hearing him talk about how he liked the interaction between Picard and Elnor, and I agree that the teaser for that episode was actually really good, and it was one of the better teasers, actually. I do agree with that. And I think what we found in our group and talking about it with people is that everyone has got a pretty different rating for this. There are people who've, when they've ranked the season, are putting like Et in Arcadia Ego Part 1 towards the bottom, which I certainly wouldn't do. And there are people who are putting Stardust City Rag towards the top, which I certainly wouldn't do. So, I think it really has really split people in terms of the aspects of Picard that I think they've really liked. But I'd be lying if I said I loved it, but I'd also be lying if I said I hated it, because I really didn't. I'm squarely in the middle, and I think quite honestly it's in step with the majority of Star Trek in that it's a bit of a wonky first season, and that's kind of, there hasn't been a Star Trek series since the first season of the original series that hasn't been a bit wonky in places.
That's true, yeah.
So even Discovery, which is one of the better ones, is a season of two halves, So, yeah, I think I perch myself in the middle, and that's where I'm going to stay, I think, for now.
What you said there about your critical brain and your fan brain, I think I would probably fall halfway in between. So that I think that giving it the 8, because I could probably dismiss some things that I've noticed more readily and more easily than others may be able to. And I think I've mentioned this before, that I haven't seen all of the original series, so I've come at it from a Next Generation viewpoint, that that it was that's where my fandom came into that there. But there's still the enjoyment and that kind of aspects and the nostalgia elements that have been in that have been really nice. But I'm quite open. I'm quite an open person when it comes to new things and trying new things. And I'm also someone that has a horrible. It takes a lot for me not to give up it on a TV show, for example. I might end up to the bitter end of a TV show which has actually got quite crap in certain elements, but I've still got to watch it to the end. So that's probably where I'm coming from, is that I can see a lot of things that are wrong, or that I feel is wrong. We'll talk about characters, as I say, a bit later on. There's some stuff that really grates on me, but in other elements it's like, oh, that's a really good trick, or that's a really good story, or that's a really good moment. I really enjoy that, and I think that's where I fall between. And I think could it improve? Of course it could. Could it be tighter in the way it's told its story? Yeah, it could. And it's interesting what you say about the Stardust City Rag, with that being almost episodic, and is that what people are looking for rather than this 10 episode arc? Is that why people like Stardust City Rag more than the other 9 episodes potentially?
That's actually a really good question, because from that perspective, that would be one of my favourite episodes, because I would love to see more of an episodic take on Picard and generally this entire era of Star Trek. I would, because there is that 90s part of me that does miss some of the 90s aspects, much as I, in fact, wrote what I would say is a relatively staunch defence of Picard's approach to the Star Trek universe on my blog, which I will put in the show notes for this, actually, in which my argument was really that, yes, there are people coming out there, as always, saying, oh, well, this isn't Star Trek, this isn't what Star Trek should be. And it's like, well, people have been saying that for years. In the old days, it was more about the style and the tone of it. When Deep Space Nine came out, there were people saying, well, this isn't Star Trek, 'cause it's not like the Next Generation, and they're not on a ship, and blah, 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 blah. But this time round, people are saying that partly because of the style of the way it's made, the serialization, the fact that people have described Picard Season 1 as a 10-episode movie. And I think to some extent there is something to that. I don't think it entirely fits. I think you could really take, I would say you could pluck out about 6 episodes of this season, put them together, and it would be a movie. I think you could take the first 3 episodes, condense them into 2, which was the original plan after all, and then skip to basically the Impossible Box, and then probably skip to Broken Pieces and wedge those 6 episodes. So Remembrance, Maps and Legends, The End is the Beginning, The Impossible Box, Broken Pieces, and then the finale, but condense them from 7 to 6, and that's your movie. And the others are more our outliers. Absolute Candour's a bit of a veer off. Stardust City Rag is a veer off. Nepenthe, which is my favourite episode of the season, is still a veer off. But with Stardust City Rag, it was a little bit more standalone, which is great in one sense. It just wasn't very well done, in my opinion. You know, it was badly executed, in my opinion. But there are people who think it was brilliantly executed. So I'm not saying that that's a fact by any means. With Star Trek is one of those franchises where people absolutely have different takes on what they think is good and what they think isn't. I think for me, the reason I don't think Picard is a great first season of television is because it's trying to do a lot. It's trying to pick up a lot of story threads from, Nemesis and the Next Generation days and, the Star Trek 09 movie that was sort of laid out there. It's trying to reintroduce Picard. It's trying to bring in loads of new characters. It's trying to service some older characters. It has more to do in that sense than Discovery did, actually, in that Discovery had its place in that, prequel to the original series sort of area, but it had less to sort of introduce, really. Picard has got the weight of nearly 20 years of people waiting for the 24th century to come back, and it's got to reintroduce an entirely different universe, because in a way that's exactly what this is. From Discovery, it is a completely different universe. There is a real difference in where the Star Trek universe looks 150 years later. So it had a lot on its shoulders, and I think the admirable part is that it had a story that was, I think, pretty well plotted out. I think from episode 1, they kind of knew where they were going in episode 10. I think I don't feel that in Discovery, but certainly in the first season of Discovery, I didn't feel that really that they knew where they were going to be in episode 15 or 16 or of that show, wherever it was. Whereas I do feel with Picard, they knew exactly where they were heading from the beginning, and I think in that sense, it will all tie up thematically in terms of story and that kind of thing. Where I think it falls down is that I don't think there's a richness to some of it that it deserves. And I think, honestly, if you took out Patrick Stewart, I don't think it would be great. I don't think really that it would be particularly great science fiction. I don't think it would be. I don't think it would really stand out as anything that much, because I don't necessarily think it's one of the strongest ensembles of characters. But it's early days, and people have to grow into these roles. You could have said the same at the start of DS9, at the start of TNG. People need time to grow into these characters, and I think by the end of the series they had. And while I still have issues with one or two of the performances and one or two of the characters, I feel they're in a better position at the end than they were at the beginning. So it does change, it does morph, it does evolve, but it does definitely still have some way to go, I would say.
Oh, yeah, I would agree that it has some way to go. There's definitely, Elnor is the perfect example, isn't it? He's very much just sketched at the moment, where, like Rios and Raffi are a bit more, you've got a bit more depth to them now, and by the time you get to Broken Pieces, both Raffi and Rios are a lot more formed, and you can tell that in the finale. But yeah, I would agree with quite a lot of that. The only things that I struggle with sometimes, and I think I've mentioned this a couple of times, is sometimes the directness of the way that the story's told. You're almost told, or this has happened, and there's no real depth to it, and I think that is a shame. I think that's where I struggle with, because there's no real depth to what we're seeing. I don't have much of a problem with the whole Borg thing. I appreciate the reason why they didn't want to go down the Borg route, and especially the Queen 7 mode, where you think it's going one way and it diverts to the right, and it's like, oh, okay, we're not going down there. I appreciate that, actually. I think that's a really good step. And I'm sure that we'll get into some of the XP stuff when we talk about what we think for season 2. But I enjoyed some of those aspects, and I know that some people didn't, because they want to see the Borg back. They want to see the Borg, being the imminent threat that people need, and and that whole kind of nostalgic feel of that, and the Borg have been used to death in Voyager, and First Contact is the movie, and that's another movie where it needs to refer back to in Picard's history. So, and obviously you mentioned Discovery. The style is very different, and the thing with Discovery had more issues with the look and feel, with the whole Kelvin timeline kind of look style to it that people aren't happy with. Whereas in Picard, you can get away with that look and feel because, it's in the future. You can have like holographic displays for piloting ships and things. So I get all that from a more like sort of look and feel of the show. But I do like the 10 episode aspects to it, and I appreciate what you're saying overall. With this, it has a lot to do, and I think it gets over the majority of it. But I'm sure that as we dive into the season as a whole, there'll be loads of things that we'll be able to pick out.
So yeah, why don't we talk about the characters now then of Picard and see what we think about each of their journeys. Maybe we should save the big man till last and actually go through sort of in maybe not ascending order, but go from the bottom to the top in a way. So why don't we start with who I think is probably my favourite new character, Chris Rios, Captain Chris Rios of The Last Sirena, played by Santiago Cabrera, who obviously makes his debut in episode 3, and then is the former Starfleet officer who captains the Last Sirena crew. Raffi puts Picard in touch with him, and then he's this cigar-chomping, quite grumpy former commander who we later find out is very involved in all of the plot with the androids and Soji and that kind of thing. What did you think of Rios, certainly from the beginning to where we end up with the character?
They did a really interesting thing with Rios with I think I mentioned this in the episode, where it was almost as if they were portraying him as a Han Solo type character. He was going to be this star-buckling Western type person. And what we got was very, very different. And I just thought that if we're going to talk about Rios, we need to talk about the holograms as well.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So the fact that they scattered his personality throughout those holograms was a really nice technique, and using Trek lore as well. I like the fact that they actually used that emergency medical hologram as a way to use the Trek lore, but also to bring this character in. Rios himself, he's a very wounded individual, and I like the fact that every one of these characters have something that's been really important in their life, which has affected them to varying degrees. And with Rios, the way that they've portrayed him as this guy who's lost all, it's very similar to Picard in some ways, hasn't he? Because he's lost his mojo with what happened to his captain and what his captain did, and he saw him as a father figure, and that those little elements would really work quite well. I thought even when he's talking to Dr. Jurati as well, that he's opening to listening to people, and I think he's a well-rounded character. I think that I'm really intrigued to see more of him and see him come out of his shell, especially the way that Picard instantly saw him as, you're very Starfleet, you know what you're doing. But yeah, I think as you mentioned, he's probably my favourite character because of that, because they've found him really quickly and they know how to use him, and he's multi-layered, and that's what I particularly like about him, that he can go from looking at existential crisis and death, but then in other ways he's listening to people and trying to empathise with them, and I think that's a really good trait that he's had.
Yeah, he's not the character I thought he would be, definitely. You mentioned the Han Solo thing. I really got that vibe from the trailer, and I was really pleased when he wasn't, because that kind of character, it's not to say that you can't have that kind of character in Star Trek, but they've always, when you have had those kind of rogues in Star Trek, they've always sort of stuck out with like a sore thumb, and they've almost been played a little bit for comedy or for ridiculousness. They don't always fit, I think, in that universe. Whereas what Rios actually turned out to be was an existentially damaged former Starfleet officer he's very cynical, he's the trauma of his captain, betray all the principles that he held dear and then lose his career over it. So there is a noble tragedy to Rios that Santiago Cabrera, who I think is one of the stronger actors in the ensemble, to be honest, is able to bring out in Rios, and he's multifaceted. And I think he's a good example of an actor who's been able to do more with the material that's been on the page than some of the other actors have been strong enough to actually do for me, because I think there is potential to really do some great stuff with Rios, and I think Broken Pieces was a good example of, if you give Santiago Cabrera a good amount to do, he'll bring it home, because all that hologram stuff was terrific in that episode, and it was one of the best. And by default, he actually made Raffi better as well. That episode was probably Raffi at best in this entire season, so it's interesting how, you know, one actor can make another actor or another character better by proxy. And I think I was just what surprised me, and I said this in the episodes, was how Rios ended up tied into the main story. I fully expected the Ibn Majid to be either a future plot line or just a backstory element. I didn't expect it to factor into Coppelius and Sung and the androids and all this. So that was a bit of a shock, but I think it worked. I think the fact it all combined didn't detract for me, and he still stands as as probably the best new character, I think, of this show. Definitely. I
know you talked about that, and I was listening to that podcast when you were talking about that, and it did detract for me. I thought it was too convenient that was in there, and I would have liked it the way you've just mentioned about it was something different, and maybe another story plot that we could maybe factor in next season, that we could bring in to be a different story. I just felt that it was too nicely tied up in a bow, and I'd like it a bit looser than that. It didn't detract from the whole story, because I think in the end as well, that I don't think it really added too much to the finale. There was like literally just the sutra bit, and that was it. It wasn't my favourite part of his story arc, really. I think I would have definitely enjoyed it more had we seen more of the Ibn Majid, maybe in season 2 as more of a backstory to him. That's just my personal opinion on that. I felt it was too tied up in a bow.
That's fair enough, and it could have gone out. It could have gone into other places. They could have put that in their back pocket. Yeah, no, I agree. They didn't have to do it in this way. There could have been other ways. So I can see what you mean. Moving on then, what about a character who's sort of related to Rios in many ways? Dr. Agnes Jurati, played by Alison Pill, who is the synthetic specialist who comes on the mission with Picard, who was the protege and, as it turns out, lover of Dr. Bruce Maddox, who they originally go off to look for. And she is ostensibly designed at first as the sort of kooky comedy character. She's a bit out of her depth. She's never left Earth before. She's a scientist. She's a bit of a boffin. But this is nothing against Alison Pill, because I actually think Alison Pill is a pretty good actor. But I think Jurati, as a character, is all over the shop. Perhaps more than any other character in this show. I don't believe for a minute. I don't believe in her story for 1 minute. All the twists and turns it takes, from the relationship with Rios, which never really rings true, the murder of Maddox, and let's not be ambiguous about this. She kills a man in cold blood, and it doesn't matter whether she's got reasons and she's a bit damaged by the admonition. You know, she murders a man, and they kind of let her off at the end of the season. And the fact that she ebbs in 1 minute from that comedy to that sort of trauma to being almost Picard's Troy. Certainly in that finale, he's almost like playing the Deanna Troi. She's almost playing the Deanna Troi kind of role, you know, that person he can talk to and that kind of thing. So, I was a bit like, pick a lane, guys, you know. And in fact, I was disappointed that she either didn't die in the final episode or she didn't stay on Coppelius and have a redemption arc, because I feel like that character shouldn't really be part of this crew. For me, like I don't think she was well realised at all in many ways, and again, I think the only saving grace was the fact Alison Pill does the best she can.
No, I would agree with a lot of that. I think the thing about the show is that we get introduced to characters that are already broken, and she's a character who has had issues in the past with this thin ban, and you know, her work has been removed from her, but doesn't have really anything that really kind of gives her anything like PTSD or anything like that at all. She's just, you know, her work has been destroyed, and it would have been nice to, if they were you're saying pick a lane, I think that's a perfect analogy of that, because I think if they'd picked the lane of this was a character who has been irrevocably changed because of what she's seen in that admonition, and that she ends up murdering Maddox, and her whole being is like broken down to like almost being, you know, non-existent as such. That, you know, she's literally gone mad in the way that Ramdra goes mad.
Yeah.
Then I could get on board with that, because it's how do you build that back up and how do you deal with that? But you're right with jumping around, because as much as it's a great scene when she turns around with those smiley faces and it's funny in the last episode, it jumps back to what she was 3 or 4 episodes ago before she killed Maddox, and it is all over the place. And I would like to have seen either just don't do that murder scene, find another way around it, or do something different with her, because it just didn't seem to ring true, this whole murder thing. And then all of a sudden, I thought we were going to Deep Space 12. Oh, hang on a second, we're just going to fly off into a ship and let's see where we are in season 2. It doesn't feel right. And I'm same as you, Alison Pill. I absolutely adore the newsroom, and she was brilliant in that TV show. And it was disappointing to see that, you know, that her character's not really treated with respect in that way. So
I feel like, though, there's a couple of instances in this where they don't want to lose the actor. And I think Alison Pill's the biggest example. I think Issa Briones is the other one, actually, because I think, really, Soji probably should stay on that planet, really. And I don't really feel like you need that character anymore, because a story almost has been told in many ways. I think what you might end up simply now is a repetition of data, or just on a smaller scale. And I feel like that's done. Whereas I think they like the actor, and I think they like both these actors, and they didn't want to lose them. Whereas I think what they should have done was, not in a literal sense, but kill your darlings a bit more and actually leave them. You know, have Jurati have that redemptive arc. You know, she killed a man. She needs to pay for it. It's not enough for Sung to go, oh, you're naughty, you are. You know, which is basically what he does. And then Picard, you know, to be a bit firm with her. No, it's not enough. You know, she's a murderer, essentially, and she should have been dropped off at Deep Space 12, or she should be in the brig, really. And I think that's part of it. And I think Soji, you know, well, we'll talk about it in a sec. But I think you have that instance where there is a reluctance to leave behind people they maybe should have left behind and wrap up stories they should have wrapped up. And I think Jurati should have not gone beyond this season, but I think we'll have to see, you know, if they can find a way to do that. And maybe season 2 will deal with that. Maybe they will deal with her being, you know, facing punishment for that. She might well go through a sort of guilt arc now. She might well face her, you know, demons, be having nightmares of killing Maddox, you know. And if they deal with that and they don't just forget about it, fine. That's fine. You know, retrospectively, it'll be okay. But we'll have to see. Really.
It's interesting you say that, because, I mean, by no ways am I referring this to Jurati, but you think about the ISO brides that have gone away and want to come back, for example, whether or not you could thematically sort of deal with that as you say, in an arc of, you know, she has murdered this person, where does she go from there? How does she react to that? But as you say, that's be more retrospective if they do pick up on that in season 2, and that would be fine. But do we think that they will actually go down that route? I'm not sure they will.
I don't know. It's hard to say, isn't it? I don't know. Maybe they might do, but it's the jury's out, I think. Let's talk about Soji then, Dr. Soji Asher, because she is one of the key characters of the season, played by Issa Briones. Well, she is the key character because she's the one that Picard goes looking for. She's the android created by Sung and Maddox off Data's like positronic thing. So she is and she isn't a daughter of Data. I don't really buy that, to be honest. Data didn't make these her and Darge and the rest of them. They were made by Sung and Maddox. They're not Data's daughters. They just have a bit of Data in them, you know. So I don't really buy that emotional connection at all. It's, you know, Lal was Data's daughter, so there's a difference between the two. But then she goes through quite a big arc, doesn't she? You know, she at the start she's been, and our friend Duncan Barrett's made a good point on the Facebook group very recently, in that, you know, Soji was groomed by Narek. She wasn't romanced as such by him. She was groomed by him, really. And that is a good point to make, actually, because it does put their awful relationship in context, actually. You know, she goes through that on the Borg cube of being groomed and being part of the Reclamation Project to trusting Picard and going off and realising who she is. So, I mean, there's a big arc there for her. For me, well, there's two things. Firstly, I think even though she was only in half of one episode, Darge was a far more interesting character. And also, obviously, Issa Briones also plays Sutra, the evil sort of android in the final couple of episodes. But the other thing as well is that I don't believe Soji's actions in the final 2 episodes. I feel like they were so forced for the need to have that big beacon go up and the possibility of they're the evil machine gods, you know. And it's all the way I was going, why would Soji do this? She's only met these people 2 minutes ago, right? Yes, okay, she knew them. She had the memories come back and she knew them in the past and things like that. But I don't believe she would flip that quickly. She only found out she was synthetic, or remembered she was synthetic like a week ago or 2 weeks ago or whatever it was. I just didn't buy it, and I felt like the whole difficult choice she has didn't ring true. There wasn't enough layered in there. There wasn't enough time spent for her to really face this decision of, do I go with this radical idea of that organics must be destroyed because they're all going to kill us, or, you know, do I look at the really great, noble, organic man, Picard, who has loved me and looked after me and cared for me for the last weeks? Why would I just suddenly go, let's kill them all? I don't believe it. I just don't believe it at all. I think it doesn't ring true. So I feel like Soji was a character who was really geared by the plot far more than she was by her as a character, which maybe is the point. I don't know what you think.
You stole my thunder, because I was going to wait till you finished that question and went. And this is what my response was going to be. I miss Darge. But yeah, I watched a little bit of Remembrance this morning, and she is a much more interesting character, Darge. I think this is kind of the thing that I was talking about before, about them not going to depth. You put it perfectly there. That it's a sudden change, and there's no real reason for it, or it's just like, she's remembered her memories now and it's all clicked into place, and this has to happen because the organics have chosen for me and chosen for us. It's our choice to make, and the whole fear aspect that they wanted to bring into it, and the sacrifice questions that she has with Picard. But they're few and far between, and they're quite cold conversations. They don't really get to grips on how torn she is. And if they'd brought that in, and I'm going to say this on a few characters here, that if they'd brought in this a bit more, I know they did discuss this, and, you know, we have in the Nepenthe, she's struggling with, you know, is it just a game to everyone? That's why she's being groomed, and she doesn't trust anyone. But we get through that. Yes, there's a little bit in there, but it just seems like a switch. Now, had the admonition happened to Soji in some other way, then you could maybe buy that a bit more. That, you know, that it's happened to her, but it's just what Sutra has told Soji, and a lot of that was off screen as well. That we're getting it from Picard's point of view, and we're not seeing what's happened with Sutra and Soji. And it would have been nice to see some more depth on the finale, to find out exactly how she's doing it and how she's managing that.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, don't get me started on Sutra, because she didn't amount to a hill of beans. She amounted to less than a hill of beans than the Zat Vash did, you know, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But like that, Sutra was just that whole build up was wasted. You know, really, it should have been her making that beacon instead of Soji. What I fully expected to happen, to be honest, was that after Sung does the old little magic wand on her and knocks her out, that as Soji is starting to worry, maybe I should stop the beacon, or even after she stops the beacon and Starfleet leave and all this kind of thing, suddenly Sutra wakes up and goes, I must finish the work, starts the beacon again, and they're all buggered because there's no Starfleet, there's no Romulans, but the beacon is still firing, and there has to be some kind of sacrifice that's Jurati sort of, I don't know, blows herself up to stop it or something. That is what I would have done, to be honest, because then it pays off the fact that Sutra was built up as this bad guy. She then becomes the destroyer as opposed to Soji, which never really rings true. And you actually fulfill that sense of prophecy in a way, and then you have a real sacrifice. So I just feel like it was a waste, you know. And I think that Issa Briones, again, he's one of those actors I think that will grow as an actress and grow as a performer into this role. And I think she did the best she could with three, and she was quite good at distinguishing the three different characters. She does well with that, particularly Sutra. She really does come across as a seductive, evil android. So she did a good job, and I think she did the best she could with what she got. And I think they did to their credit, they did try and give Soji a good arc, but I think it was a bit hit and miss for me, and I didn't always believe in a lot of what it was about, really. I feel the same way about the next character that we're going to talk about, who I've warmed to a lot, but I've really struggled with this entire season. Raffi Musica, played by Michelle Hurd, who was obviously Picard's old Starfleet. Later on as we know from the Time material, when they were on the Starship Verity, she was his number one. She was his first officer for years as they were helping with the Romulan crisis. And she left Starfleet, or was kicked out of Starfleet at roughly the same time that Picard resigned his commission, which we saw at the start, I think, of The End is the Beginning. And she then fell into drug use. She lost contact with her husband and her son, and she became a bit of a wacky sort of conspiracy theorist on the edge of, fringe theories about the Romulans being involved in the Mars attack and stuff that she ended up turning out to be right. I likened her, I think, in one of the episodes to like a Star Trek version of The Lone Gunman or Max Fennig from The X-Files. That kind of wacky conspiracy theorist who actually is probably quite right, really. But I just didn't like her for a good proportion of this season, and I think partly it was the performance that I felt like Michelle Hurd, everything was sass. Every kind of line, she was like, "Oh, JL," and I was like, just tone it down, lower it down a bit, please, because it's just a little bit grating. But I think it was also the writing. I think the writing wasn't always there for Raffi, and I feel like she ebbed and flowed from. At one point, she was a traumatized drug addict. One point, she was a conspiracy theorist. One point, she's trying to be a mother hen. One point, she's a mother who's trying to reconnect with her son. One point, then she might Michael Chabon has suggested that when she contacts Starfleet, I think it might be in the Impossible Box or one of the two, one of the episodes, that she might have had a bisexual relationship with this Starfleet crew woman on the screen, which I don't think was really there at all, on the screen. I think that was... So there's lots of... And then finally at the end, when you have that bizarre moment at the final where she holds hands with Seven, I mean, that was just bizarre. It's not that she can't be bisexual or they can't have an open gay relationship on the show. I think that's brilliant. But earn it, for Christ's sake, And actually that was really strange, and it just stood out like a sore thumb, really. So I think that she's been all over the map, but I don't know about you. Towards the end of the season, I really liked her. I started to warm to her because I think that Michelle Hurd really started to find the character, and I feel like the writers did, maybe not intentionally, but they did sort of tone her down a bit in a way, and she felt like she was becoming more of a rounded individual. Yeah,
I mean, I've seen Michelle Hurd in other things, and she is a good actress. I've enjoyed watching her in
I don't doubt that.
Things.
Yeah.
And but I would totally agree that she's like Jurati. She's all over the place. It was the conspiracy theory. Well, apart from the Conclave of Eight, what else did she really do? Where else was she really going with that? And I'm telling you, it's a Tal Shiar, and that's all we get.
That's it. Yeah.
That's all we get from that conspiracy theory. So why do that? Why take it down that line? And if you're going to, again, it goes back to the Jurati thing with the murder. If you're going down a alcohol dependency or drug dependency kind of route, then go for it 100%. Don't just go, I'll tell you what, let's have her slightly drunk when she's talking to her ex-girlfriend. Yeah, you know what I mean? It just doesn't really. Yeah. It's like, well, right, okay. And then obviously she's like lying in bed and, with Rios, which is another good scene. And I think that's probably... That scene there kind of is where we start to see Raffi kind of coming into her own a little bit, well, Rios especially, on that bed scene where he's kind of caring for her and things. But she's all, as you say, she's all over the map. There's not one like kind of through line with her, apart from maybe the mothering aspect. But even so, the mothering, when they get to Stardust City Rag, where she goes to see the son, I like that a little bit more than some people do, but again, they should have just gone 100% into it, and they didn't. They just kind of left it at that. All right, okay, well, I've got a kid now. It's come out of nowhere, unless you've obviously read the book. But there was that should have been rather than doing the mystery box element of why does she want to go there. Yeah, build it in that she wants to see her son. Because otherwise, because Rios just went, why are you apprehensive about going to Stardust City Rag? It's like, just say it. Just, I miss my son. I did bad by my son. Have a scene where she's talking about that. but they don't do it for any of the aspects of what her character is.
I mean, the counter argument could be that that's the whole point, that she is erratic and she is all over the place, and that is part of the character. But I think it's a failure of writing. I don't think it's that is the reality of it. I think that might be an argument, but I don't believe it. I think it's more that they haven't been able to find who she really is, which is weird, because if anything, she's got one of the most well mapped out backstories, because there is tie-in material. They have explored in this alternative supplemental material her relationship with Picard, which is long term, to the point where she calls him JL, and they have a real inbuilt relationship. And in fact, that's the other thing that a lot of people have commented on, is that they've barely had any scenes together, really, since the early part of the season. And you get that one thing, I think, in the penultimate episode, where they can admit their love for each other, which is quite nice. But even that, to me, I did like that, and it was quite sweet and it was charming. But I don't know, I just feel like it's not enough. It's not enough, and this is where the show has had so much going on. It hasn't had time to do this, and this is one of the reasons that I think Nepenthe has gone down so well with people, because it was entirely built around taking a step back, pausing and allowing for character to shine through. Hence why you get a Kestra Troy Riker be such a well-developed guest character and really shines out. Good performer, really given time to be explored as a character herself, even though she's helping Soji explore herself. That's all brilliant, and that's exactly the kind of stuff that you used to get in the old days, where you'd have an episode that was able to take time and pause. But Picard, because it's doing so much at such a lick, doesn't have time to stop and really allow a character like Raffi to be got to grips with. And I think it's a shame, because I think there is a good character there, and I think when she's being that, that caring person, like I say, I think she's at her best in Broken Pieces, when she's helping Rios put together his past. Their relationship is my favourite of those between the two of them, because I think it works really well, and I'd like to see more of those two together, because I think they worked really well off each other. So I want to like her more, and I want her to feel like because she is quite an important character, I think, and I think she could be the heart and soul of this whole thing, Raffi, if they got her right. I really do think that she could be that core in a way, but maybe season 2 will bring that home a little bit. But they need to settle down and give Michelle Hurd better material and allow Raffi to really be explored properly, I think. So yeah, we'll see where Raffi goes, I suppose. Other character, I feel like this. I'm just Stardust City ragging over everybody here. I'm really not trying to, right? It's like there are just natural, things that are coming out. I think we have to get Narissa and Narek out the way together, because I haven't really got a lot of good stuff to say about these two. Maybe Narek a little bit more.
Oh, nice.
Because of the two, I have to say, my mind has been slightly changed by the last episode of this show, because you and Darren, if not gave a staunch defence of Narek, you certainly made me see that there was maybe a little bit more to the character and to Harry Treadaway's performance than I'd first given it credit for, really. Darren put it very well when he said he can do sort of damaged and smug at the same time, and I think that's really on point for Narek, and I think that's what he's been. Or he feels like a lost little boy who, in the one sense, while also being a horrible abuser on the other. And I think it's been a real interesting balance, even if he is really just there to serve a purpose. And he's never really felt like a real character to me, particularly. And, as I say, Duncan made that good point about him grooming Soji, which is a good way to look at their relationship. I don't know if it makes the scenes in the Borg Cube in Absolute Candor more bearable, to be honest, because I think I'd rather shoot myself in the face than watch that again. Give me a sick bucket, basically, and let me just hurl my guts into it. And after the Impossible Box, really, that's gone out the window. Once she does all that memory retrieval stuff, Narek then spends 3 episodes or so just following them, and he's barely in it. And then ultimately they forget about him. Halfway through the finale, he just gets carted away after the unsuccessful attempt to stop them getting the beacon online, and they forget about him. They don't mention him again. So you could, in theory, just have him a prisoner on that android planet, and that's it. I don't know. I mean, but I think they did at least try and give him some shades of character. Narissa, though, I mean, crikey. I mean, and I'll say that it's a shame, because Peyton List is actually a good actor. And she does give it her best shot But she is easily the worst villain I think I have seen on Star Trek or many other shows for quite some time. Just the most cartoonish Romulan Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones I've come across. I just think she was awful from day one. She didn't get any better. And, I mean, her quite naff death as well, where she has a brief little skirmish with Seven and gets kicked to her death. I was a bit like, well, you know what? I care so little about that character that's fairly fitting, really.
Yeah, I thought that. Yeah, I thought, well, that's good. Good that that's out the way.
Yeah,
that's what I thought.
That's exactly. Yeah, me too. I was like, oh, thank God for that. Like, let's get on with everything else now. Now she's gone. I mean, what did you think of these two generally, as in terms of the season? Are you as scornful as me?
I'm not as scornful. I always try and find the good in something.
Yeah, you be good cop. I'll be bad cop. I'm fine with that.
Narek, as I say, I had in my notes, but because Darren was speaking so eloquently about what he thought about Narek, that I could see him becoming almost an Alex Krycek from the X-Files kind of character, where he keeps popping up. And I think that there's enough in there of him being abused, potentially being abused, that myself and Brandy talked about. Brandy said you could see that Narissa potentially abused him.
Yeah.
And he's so much, he's fitting with the type of characterization that the show things, because he's a broken character that is, and we'll try and find a redemption arc for him. The grooming thing brings an interesting element to it. So yeah, I think Duncan's completely right there. So from Narek, I can see a lot of work being done to rectify that, and he's a really good actor. And again, potentially all of these are really good actors. It's just the stuff that's being given to them.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Narek, yes, I can see that. Narissa, I was glad that we've got rid of her. They tried with the whole backstory with the admonition, but that was it. And it was like, well, you've given us nothing other than that, other than potentially that you have effectively, potentially, if you look at it from Brandy's point of view, that you've abused Narek as a brother-sister thing. The showrunners have even said that they were wanting to make it a sexual brother-sister thing, which I think was just too far. And they kind of just pulled back from that. And I didn't think that was a good from start to finish anyway. And she's got a good accent. She's a very good looking girl, and that's it. It's like it's just not enough for somebody who's meant to be this evil Romulan queen kind of thing. That I would like to have seen something more. Something that again goes back to that whole she's had this admonition. Can we have more emphasis on that? But the mystery box storytelling doesn't allow for that.
No, it doesn't. So. And there were the odd flashes, of the scene with Ramda and the odd moments where maybe they were giving her slightly more, but it was very seldom. And it's a shame for Peyton List, because I think she deserved better, really. But I, to be honest, I don't know about Narek. I think that's it now. You park him and he's done. He seems very part of one story, and I feel like with Narissa dead as well. What function? I mean, I feel like you could find, if he came back, I'd shrug. I'd be like, so what? Like he's just, I don't know. I mean, you might be right. You may well be right that if they like the actor as well, they might well bring him back. But I don't know. It's hard to say.
I think early in the season, when we first started seeing it, I think I saw him as potentially coming onto the ship. That I can't see that now, but it's gone too far. But I think that's early season. I thought that
maybe he'll be their version of, like, mirror Philippa Giorgio, and pop up every now and then, and be that kind of recurring sort of bad guy, maybe ally. Yeah, maybe. You might be right. We'll have to see. They can certainly do that. They could certainly have him appear like that. So, and it might help. He might come back and be involved in a decent plot line there. But I think a lot will depend on whether or not season 2 follows a similar pattern to season 1 and actually follows a story in a particular area of the galaxy or with a particular race of aliens. And it might be that he would just stick out as a Romulan, a very sort of fundamentalist Romulan as well, in that, who knows. But speaking of Romulans, let's talk about, before we're getting close to the big man now, we're nearly there, but let's talk about Elnor, played by Evan Evagora, who is the only male in the Quad Millat, the Romulan warrior nuns who appear in absolute candour, and Elnor he's a young boy who Picard becomes attached to during the Romulan crisis, and he's like this badass sort of samurai boy who then grows up to be a badass samurai man with the caveat that he can only ever tell the truth. He doesn't lie. He's just a pure straight arrow. And he is like, to me, Elnor is the most straight arrow character I think Star Trek has ever done. I think he is the kind of, almost, people have likened him to the sort of early Worf character in The Next Generation, really. But I think even in the early days, Worf had a bit more substance. I'd say about Elnor, I still, and I've said this early on, but I still attest this, I still don't know if either Elnor is being played a certain way or Evan Ivagora is just a hopeless actor. I really don't know. I don't know the answer. It could be somewhere in the middle, and I hope it's more that it's intentional choice, that Elnor is so wooden that that's the whole point. But I think he's a sweet character, and I think he's a very useful character, but I feel like he is in dire need of exploration, and he's also in dire need of a proper challenge, because he is in danger of becoming one of those characters that if you're in a bind, you drop Elnor in, he does his magic, and you're all fine. And that's quite dangerous to have, in a way, as a character.
I can't say any more than that, really. He had some good... He's got some good humour moments.
Yeah, he does.
A couple of times.
He does. He's funny.
And I can see him, like he did on the finale, where he says, well, wouldn't he be better off dead, because of his absolute candour, that he can open up conversation. And I think that may be a way that they can potentially go down that route. But then you're talking down the data route again. You're talking, explaining how things happen and what happens within the world and the universe. I think that's probably the only way you could really take him.
And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the sort of function he will serve, to be that sort of alien observer, questioner of humanity. And he does have a nice relationship with Picard. I think he bounces well off Patrick Stewart. I think they really were trying to push a sort of dynamic with him and Seven, which I felt less was natural. If anything, I thought he had more of a little bit of a dynamic with Hugh, actually. But I think him and Picard is nice, and I like him. I like him as a character. I think he's fun, and I'd like to see more done with Elnor, because a lot of the time they don't do a lot with him this season. So
no, they have to develop him early on. I think I said this on the episode a couple of days ago, that they have to develop him early on in the season, because otherwise I fear for his character, for one, and they might just, as you say, use him as a drop device and just go, right, sort that out for me, thanks. Yeah, he's in danger of just becoming a spare part for when they need him, and to pop up with an odd one-liner or something. So we'll see. But he's fun. He is fun. He's a nice character. Well, let's talk about the big man then. Let's talk about JL, Jean-Luc Picard. I think he is the core of the series. The show's called Picard. It's about his journey. Ultimately, now we know it's about his journey from death to rebirth in many ways. This is Picard's Wrath of Khan in a way. If you think of it in the terms of going from a point where he thought that it was all over, he thought that his days adventuring were gone, he thought that he was just, decaying, really, worn out, as Kirk was in the Wrath of Khan. And then by the end, he's had a rebirth. The difference being that with Kirk, his rebirth came partly out of the death of Spock and his own emotions with that, whereas Picard literally has but then in a way it is out of the death of Data. I think that's what you can say, and that there is a similarity there in that he does lose somebody he loves, like Kirk loved Spock and he lost Spock in that moment. He does lose Data in that sense, and it takes Data in that sort of purgatory scene at the end to be the one who says to him, you've still got life to live, but I need you to let me go now in order for you to live that life, which is essentially what Data says in a Data-ish way. And that's the part of the journey. Picard is only able to really fully be reborn when he comes to terms with Data's death. And that's what he does at the end. And I think I'm gratified that if there was one character journey I feel pretty happy with, and even if I don't always think Patrick Stewart has been on point performance-wise, I think it's Picard. I think they got him right, and I think they got it right with him, which is great. Yeah, I think I think I may have mentioned this a couple of days ago, but I like the attempts for him to get back to being what he was in his hubris comments and things, and it not going right until he finally finds his moment. And I think that's a really good way that they've done that, because it used to be, because he was saying, "Oh, it's sheer fucking hubris" and all that. When he's saying, "I want my fleet of ships, give me my ships," I know exactly what I want, and I know that I can do this, and I am the one that's going to do this. But he doesn't get what he wants and what he needs, and I think that they did a really good job of that, because it then gives more. It gives more like sort of weight to when he actually does open that comms channel and starts talking to her about, making the choice and don't be the destroyer and all that type of thing. And even like this scenes which they've kind of really tapped into with his repression of his emotions, and that he's afraid to say things like that. And Soji, to be fair to Soji, is the one that draws that out in him in a previous episode. I think that was really kind of threaded in quite well. And I think that does work quite well. You're right. There was certain times you thought it's a bit out of character. He's not quite got the Picard thing going there, but he is coming from a state of wanting to die to being reborn, and I think that's that arc overall really works.
And I don't say that as a massive negative to Patrick Stewart, because I think he's really invested in this, and you can tell how much he's really enjoyed when he's listening to interviews. You can tell how much he's really enjoyed this process and coming up with this, and how excited he is about the future, which is great. And it does put Picard in a place now where they could go anywhere with him now. They really could. They've locked off his potential dying, literally dying with the Irumodic syndrome or whatever it was, the brain thing. They've confronted his demons with Data and how it was all left there, and the Romulan crisis, and they've resolved his he's out in space, he's got a crew, he's got a ship, he's back basically. He's back. They could go anywhere with him now, which is great. But I think the problem I had was that at times it felt like it was Patrick Stewart and not Jean-Luc Picard, and I think that is partly a natural evolution of any kind of character. I think there's an argument you could probably say that was creeping in with William Shatner in Generations with Kirk. I think there were points where it was Shatner and it wasn't Kirk. I think, and in things like Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. So I think you get that a lot with a lot of these characters when they play these characters for years. So I don't know if it's necessarily a big criticism, because I think on the whole, Picard was different on purpose, and that it was part of the like you say, they got him from this point where he was waiting to die, and he was a change. He wasn't the man we knew, and that was what was always said from the very beginning with this show. He's not the Jean-Luc Picard you remember on the Enterprise, and that was good. And I think where they took him, and the Golem stuff is a big cheat. It is all a big cheat. Let's be honest, right? And I think when you get to the end, and I think Darren said this in the last episode, he's not going to die, because there's a season 2 of Star Trek Picard coming. My wife said when she was watching it with me yesterday, well, he's not going to die, is he? Because it's called Picard. You can't have Picard without Picard. I was like, well, I said, okay, he doesn't die, but, and she guessed it. She guessed all of it. She guessed what would happen. She knew. Oh, she said, it's the Golem, isn't it? He's going to go into the Golem. I was like, well, wait and see. But yeah, it is that whole thing. Most audiences are fully aware that he's not going to die. And so I think, it was scenes like Raffi and Elnor, felt them crying, for instance. I was a bit like, let's just skip this, because we know he's not dead. Like, I understand why you're showing this, because they need to react in that way, because they think he's dead, but we know he's not going to die. So it's more, things like that. I think it is a big cheat, but I think thematically that's fine, because I think it gets him to a point. And I think many people have said already that the final 20 minutes of this season are probably the best of the entire season, actually. And they really did. They made such a good decision to make that very Next Generation style ending with him and Data, and the beauty of Picard being there when Data wants to die. I mean, if there is, I think that was so pitch perfect for that character, for Data, to actually want to die, because it is the culmination of his arc. He's always been about the human experience, and what is more human than death, and that is marvellous. I was just clapping my hands at that, because that's perfect, and I loved that, and I thought that was a wonderful culmination to his arc. So I think on the whole, I really do think that they did a lot with Picard and they got him from one place to another. You know, they even managed to have him confront some of his Borg fear, you know, as well, in the Impossible Box, which was really well done. So I think on the whole, maybe the only thing they could have not done was him in Stardust City Rag putting on a beret and doing all this accent. You know, you could have lost that.
Man, I'm not even touching that.
That's an example, I think, where, you know, they don't really want to say no to Patrick Stewart.
Yeah.
You know? You know? But yeah, I think I'm pleased. Because ultimately, if Picard's arc and character had failed, then this show would have been a mess. An absolute waste of space.
Yeah.
And it's not because of that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And as you say, that those last 20 minutes just work so well with everything that's gone before it. The bookend of the season, but obviously, I know I spoke about this the other day about just the things that where they went. You say about Data and not putting. He didn't have a death. He doesn't remember his death because it was B4's memories and things, and that Picard's had a death, and you know, and that's the whole point, is the whole human experience. And Picard has lived that. You know, he's 94 years old. He wants another 20 years, but you know, he knows that. And they even allude to that with the Golem. You know, they've not given him superpowers because they know Picard wouldn't want that. You know, and it mirrors Data really well in that respect. And I thought it was a really touch of class, that. And I think we discussed it with Darren. You know, it's definitely a Chabon style, isn't it? It's definitely, without a doubt.
Great stuff. I loved in that final scene where Picard suddenly goes, "You haven't made me immortal." As if it's the worst thing that could have possibly happened, that he can live forever, because he doesn't, they were like, no, calm down. I love that, because that's absolutely Picard. You know, he knows full well that he doesn't want to live forever, that would be awful. You know, he's been out there enough and he's met enough aliens and people like Q and everything to know that doesn't end well, you know. And I think that's great. I think that's a very Picard human thing, that he wants eventually to die. He's quite happy to be 120 when he does, you know, which is fair enough. So yeah, it's great. I think they nailed it, and it's so nice to see the character back, really. Before we move on to the feedback, what about the other sort of supporting characters? Who really stood out? Like, you know, we had obviously quite a few returnees. We had Hugh, we had 7 of 9, we had Riker, we had Troy. Was there anyone who really leapt out at you where their character arc, albeit briefly, was good, bad, or a waste of time? Anything leap out at you there?
Kestra was probably my favourite guest character, I think, because she just played that perfectly with Vita Briones. I thought Deanna Troi worked quite well, and what I particularly love about Riker is that there's a picture just going around of him on the battle bridge of the Enterprise D.
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah,
and it's exactly the way he's sitting on the Zheng Chen, or whatever it's called. But I appreciated that. But no, I think Kestra is the one that stands out the most out of all of them as a good one. But I think the way that the camaraderie between Riker and Picard particularly worked well. It had that Generations kind of feel to it, obviously, but him doing the pizza cooking and his recognition of who Soji was instantly with the little head tilt that he put in himself on the episode, which we don't really talk about, or the scene that we don't talk about, because she does do that little head tilt before that scene, and then obviously in Nepenthe she does the head tilt again, and Riker picks up straight away. And I'm sure that must have been a Riker thing to say, put it in that episode because I'm going to redo that. In
probably.
So I think that was the standout moment for me. I know there was the Deanna Troi and Picard talk about the son. I thought that was interesting, and obviously Troy and Soji talking between themselves. But I think for me it would probably be Kestra and then Riker and Picard talking over the pizza. Yeah,
I think Nepenthe was just wonderful from start to finish, really, and it was great to see the Troy Rikers in that. And Kestra was fab, definitely. I think really the two. I think there were a couple of things. I think 7. I think Jerry Ryan is great, and I think she hasn't aged a day, and she looks fantastic, and she slipped back into that character brilliantly. I really do think that. I don't think she had great material. Again, I don't think what they gave 7 was brilliant. I think that Stardust City Rag wasn't good. I think then she's just... I said on a few podcasts ago, I think honestly everything that they gave 7 after that could have been Hugh, frankly. Except maybe the scene with Rios.
It's only the Picard, 20 seconds that actually kind of resonated for me. You know, when she's talking about being... Again, that's kind of the depth. You know, you want to have Picard and Seven talking about that experience because they both experienced it, but we only get 20 seconds of that, and I thought that was a missed opportunity.
I just don't... I also don't understand why they didn't know each other. I mean, you know, when Seven came back after Voyager, like, surely the one person that Janeway would make her seek out would be Jean-Luc Picard, because they both are ex-Bs, you know, if you want to go down that road. Why on earth would that not have happened? It just doesn't ring true to me. I don't get it. And it just feels like that was a massive missed opportunity for Seven not to have been one of Picard, a mentee for Picard. And then, yeah, she still goes off. Maybe she still goes off with the Fenris Rangers and does all that stuff and is a bit of a cowboy in space. You can still do that. Why wasn't it like 15 years ago or whatever, before Icheb's death? Why isn't, like, don't they have a pre-existing relationship? It just is odd. It's an odd choice. And I think the other issue I had was I feel like poor Tamlin Tomita, because she's actually a good actor, and Commodore O was just a waste of time in the end. I mean, all she does in that final episode is say, "Sterilize the planet," you know, that's it. And then the whole Zat Vash stuff was such an anticlimax in the end. I thought that was just a waste, a real way. They built them up to be this massive ancient order behind the Tal Shar, you know, key part of Romulan society. She's infiltrated Starfleet, and that doesn't get any follow-up either. Like, why didn't Riker say, right, you're under arrest because you've basically been infiltrated Starfleet, head of security, and there's no comeback from that? Like, what? Like, there's so many things where they skipped over it for expediency. Where did she get those 218 Romulan warbirds from? If Romulus was destroyed and the neutral zone has collapsed and they're basically the Romulan free state, they called it at various points. Doesn't sound like an empire to me anymore. So where does she get those warbirds from? You know, there's so many... Yeah,
I would say the same for the Federation ships as well. Where did they get all them from?
Well,
you know,
yeah, I mean, know, but I can buy that. Although I did say in the article I wrote that basically the Starfleet in this are like wizards. You know, Riker just pops up. He's like a space wizard. He pops up with his big fleet, you know, and they're just a fantasy now. They're just like, they're so like away from what Picard's world is. This ramshackle, edgy sort of cowboyish world that they inhabit, that they might as well just be a bunch of wizards, like the Time Lords in Doctor Who, really. In the context of this series anyway, not Discovery as much, but, you know. So, yeah, I just think that was a shame. But, you know, I am glad with Seven. I am glad she's potentially going to be part of the crew, and they make Jerry Ryan a regular, because Jerry Ryan's great. And I think if they give, you know, please, God, in season 2, get Kate Mulgrew in, and let's get a Janeway 7 episode, for goodness sake. Like, that would be brilliant. She has to face her mentor, and Janeway is upset and angry at where Seven's ended up. You know, that'd be brilliant drama. Absolutely brilliant. So, you know, there's so much they could do there. So, fingers crossed they will. But yeah, character-wise, anyone else you want to mention, or should we move on to some feedback from what people thought about the season?
Yeah, there's nothing really jumping out at me at the moment. So, yeah, I think feedback will be a good thing to do.
Oh,
go on.
Actually, Laris and Zuban.
Oh, how can we forget them? It was so long ago.
Please bring them back.
It was so long ago. Yeah, no, I think they saw us through the first part of the season, didn't they? The first 3. I think that, yeah, I completely forgot about them. And that's not through, like, sort of them being bad, because they were brilliant. And well, we've mentioned them early in the episode, actually, early in this podcast. So just through, you know, Northern Romulan ridges.
It's true.
And the little spray.
Love them to bits, though.
Yeah, no, they are. I do hope that we do get to see some of them. The one thing I did want to mention about Picard, though, actually, while I'm thinking about going that far back, is that the only thing I feel that they missed was, I think we needed to see more of the brain disease, at least affecting him more. I know it gets mentioned a couple of times, but
probably.
It doesn't really... It's all of a sudden, it just happens. Where it could have been nice to have a couple of breakdowns through the course of the season. But I think that's a good point, actually. Yeah, layer it in a little bit more. I agree. I think that's true, because you don't get a mention, do you? After Maps and Legends, I think it is, or The End is the Beginning, when he meets the Doctor, and that's it. Then he's like, that's true. Yeah, but Larson Zaban definitely. Yeah, I would love to see them more. We definitely need to go back to back to the chateau at some point because they were brilliant.
I think, given how well they were received, particularly Laris, and all of Brady's, great Irish Romulan mother hen, I think you'll see them again. I don't think they planned to. I think they thought they didn't expect the fan reaction to those two. So I think you'll get them out. They'll get them out in space. I fully expect that to happen next season, if only for one episode, because the fan reaction to those two has been so great.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, more of that, please.
Yeah, there'll be nice recurring characters, wouldn't they? Even if it's just one episode a season. Right
then, let's talk then about what you guys thought as listeners, and get into some feedback then about season 1. Okay, so thanks to everyone then who has commented on the Make It So podcast fan group. We'll start with Jane Boyle, who said, I've commented elsewhere about the ambiguity of et in Arcadia ego, but the thing of which I'm really interested is the iromodic syndrome. I suggested elsewhere early in the season this was a banker against the possibility of Sir Patrick, who, bless his heart, is no spring chicken, becoming incapacitated during the season. However, the ending seems to suggest that Picard was intended to be a single season with Picard dying at the end. The iromodic syndrome storyline makes no sense otherwise. Not really happy about yet another death, quote marks, that isn't. No doubt I'll be told that's, quote mark, modern filmmaking, but there really have been too many, quote mark, resurrections. There's no investment in a death if we were all going, yeah, right, another series. And that, to be honest, that's kind of what I said earlier, really, isn't it? About, the fact that we know that he's not going to die. I think it's interesting that Jane thought that maybe this would be a one-season thing. And I remember thinking at the time, I wondered if this would be a limited thing and that Patrick Stewart wouldn't want to do multiple seasons. That he'd come in and he'd say, let's do one season, finish it off for Picard, give him a noble death or whatever, and then it's done. I mean, do you think that was the plan? And then they realised how good this was and how much fun it was and they changed course? Or do you think that maybe it's just always been this way?
It did rush through my mind during the death scene whether or not that was intended to begin with and that they were just going to have a one-season book-ended. This is where we're going to go with it. Picard has a decent death. He's done everything that he can do, and that's him finished for the show entirely. I thought that would be quite fitting, but it did. That's what raced through my mind. Because obviously during the death scene, it was like, well, he's coming back for season 2. He's not going to die. And also then it was, well, that was probably what they wrote in the first place, but then they've changed it when they got a second season. So that's where I kind of stood with it, and I feel the same with Jane. Actually, I felt that potentially it was a one-season thing, and that, but then obviously the way he's become the executive producer and he's had input onto it so much that he's enjoyed it that much that they've now got this 3. But I heard the 3-season thing was quite early on, though, wasn't it? I think that people were hearing that potentially we're going to do 3 seasons, and then they've confirmed the second season. So.
Yeah.
So I do see that, and it did go through my mind that potentially that death scene would have been potentially written in originally, and they've just retrofitted the rest at the end.
That's probably what I would agree with. I think I'd go with that as well. But it's interesting thought. Craig McKenzie, who's been on the show, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, says it started off really well, but really lost it by the end. Once all the questions started being answered, it was clear it wasn't worth the build-up. The characterisation of Picard was really problematic throughout, with no real purpose. The new characters were often afterthoughts, and the season overall left me with a feeling that Picard and TNG should remain in the past. That being said, whenever it focused on being a sequel to TNG and made use of the elements unique to that series, it was excellent. Riker and Troy were used wonderfully, and Data's death was just really beautiful. I'm just not sure the rest was worth it to get to these moments. I've said it before, but I think Picard is a dumb show that frequently butchers an iconic character, but occasionally has some nice moments. I mean, I wouldn't. I think he's more harsh than either of us would be. Genuinely, I think. Really, I see what he means. I do understand what he means, but I think I wouldn't say the show's dumb for me personally.
No, I think I would still go with direct. I think the show's direct and doesn't have a depth on certain things. It likes to get from A to B to C quickly, and doesn't really kind of go, to an A+ or an A- and then move on. I think there's the depth there. I think I have an issue with that, but then I have an issue with that with a lot of TV shows of late that don't really just hang and just give that more of an ethereal or more of a thematic or an emotional. I think the way that Darren described it was emotional rather than plot driven. And then even if you do lose some of the like we both know, we're both X-Files fans, the way the X-Files was dealt with was more of that kind of feel to it. It was looser with its storytelling, but it dealt with feelings more. Whereas I think that this is more direct and going from A, B, C rather than doing that.
Dominic Nardi said, I'm pretty disappointed. For all the talk about how this new era of Trek is darker in response to 9/11 and the rise of populism, I find that the Picard show really doesn't have much of interest to say. For all Patrick Stewart claimed this show would be a response to Brexit and the refugee crisis, I can't discern any clear message or commentary beyond vaguely preaching for tolerance. Even that message is undercut, probably unintentionally, but by the plot. The season begins with Picard advocating on behalf of Romulan refugees, which was great, but then we learn, no, in fact, the Federation was right to distrust the Romulans. They infiltrated Starfleet, were responsible for the attack on Mars, and had a secret fleet of hundreds of warbirds ready to attack Starfleet ships, and Narissa is a moustache-twirling villain. So is the show actually saying we should fear the other, in quote marks? I'm sure that's not really what the writers meant, but I don't really know what to take away from all this. I think it's interesting. Me and Dom have had some good chats on, and I don't always agree with his take on Star Trek, really, modern Star Trek, but he makes an interesting point. And I think in terms of the Romulan thing, I feel that I don't feel that they are the Romulans. This is something that, and this is something that, to be honest, the show is at fault for, because there are, in the last few episodes, Picard was saying, "Oh, the Romulans are coming," and I felt like I wanted him to be saying the Zat Vash are coming, because I think there's a discerning difference here. I think that the Romulans, I don't think we've really seen them this season. I think we've seen the Zat Vash. I think we've seen these zealots, these powerful zealots who have access to resources and who have infiltrated Starfleet. And I really think there is a difference, because ultimately we saw that there was a treaty signed between the Romulans, or what was left of the Romulan Empire, and the Federation, which led to the Borg artifact and all this kind of stuff, which is all background and they've not really told us much about. But I feel there is a distinguishing thing here, and I think it's something that the show doesn't always... It doesn't always really react to. I think they find it easier to just explain the Romulans are coming because they're more identifiable, but I think there is a distinction, and I think it's, again, the fact that he talks about some of these issues weren't fully dealt with. I think it is a consequence, again, of time and of having to get through a lot of plot. And I think those things are there. I think the commentaries on, refugees, Brexit, that kind of thing, they are there, but we haven't got 26 episodes to deal with it, you know?
I think you're right with the Tal Shiar, because the Tal Shiar, it's not the Romulans, it's not the Tal Shiar, it's the people within the Tal Shiar that are the Zat Vash. So it's a deeper mythology. And the 218 warbirds, I don't think for a second that they are Zat Vash. They're not. As far as I'm concerned, they're Tal Shiar or Romulans that the Zat Vash are using with whatever they've said about this planet.
Yeah.
I don't for
fair.
a second believe that they're all 218 ships of however many people are on those Romulan warbirds are Zat Vash. I think it's a small, it's a small syndicate of people that. But
do you think though that it's the Romulan Empire though who are behind this? Because I don't. No. I don't think it's the Romulan government who are sending O out there. Do you know what I mean? That's the difference. That's where I'm seeing it from a Tal. It's a Tal Shiar, but it's Commodore O. Commodore O. Don't know what to call her anymore. Yeah, but it's all using her resources. That you mentioned it, resources. She's using the resources she's got and is able to do that. But my question would be a couple of things. Just from a narrative point of view, what was O's other job within Starfleet security if they knew that O was in Romulan as a Romulan Tal Shiar agent? What was her other things that she needed to deal with? So there's that element. But I've always taken it as, I think it's probably because we're wired up to think X-Files, so it's a different thing. Yeah. I would definitely consider that the Zat Vash are a small number of people who have broad sweeping power, who are able to use the resources they've got to use whatever, but it's not really explicitly led that way, because even to the point where Riker asks Picard, Riker says, let me have a guess, it's that's Data's daughter, and it's the Tal Shiar, because it's not just Romulan, because even Riker says it's not Romulans, it's the Tal Shiar, because you're even more scared. So he's saying it's Tal Shiar, it's just another level below that, and Picard never confirms that, actually it's a secret, secret people within that. With regards to the way that they talk about it,
I would agree with that too, like what he's saying, because of the, the things like the XBs, the wonderful scenes in there when he realizes that the Borg aren't the enemy, the victims. I think that was really Impossible Box is probably one of my favourite episodes of the season for that reason. And then you've got the XBs being talked about with Seven about, well, why don't they die? So they do touch upon it, but it's not as, I agree with him, it's not as direct as what we were led to believe, the way that Patrick Stewart was leading it down, saying we're going to be touching upon it. Had it been, and I know this takes a little side step, but had it been what we've read in the book, then that's more to the degree of what Dominic is saying there. The book is more focused on the refugee crisis and what we are doing in the world today.
Finally, in terms of feedback on Season 1, Karen Williams said, I loved it. I think the whole film in 10 episodes made for frustrating viewing early on, and I half wished I'd saved them up to binge, or that they dropped in one go. But that said, I still liked it. The use of legacy characters didn't feel forced, and it was nice for Data to have a proper send-off. Looking forward to seeing how they function as a crew, and in what mission in this altered 24th century now the synth issue is solved, in quote marks. Which is great, yeah, and I think that's a real nice positive note to sort of leap into some Season 2 theorising, because we've got a couple of people who've actually said what they would like to see in Season 2. So we'll go with that before we talk about what we would like to see or what we think might be seen. Laura Redenbaugh says, I'd like them to recap some of the plot points that got edited out in the finale that Michael Chabon answered questions about and that some people are all caught up complaining about. That the XBs and Narek stayed behind to build a new colony alongside Data's children. That Agnes will turn herself over to the authorities as soon as they get back to Federation space. That Data did not want his existence to continue, and that the Golem was intended to receive the transfer of a human consciousness, not Data's. Then to cover new topics. If Jerry Ryan is going to be a regular or recurring in Season 2, then I think how she joined the Fenris Rangers needs to be covered. That's a tie-in book, Laura, but never mind. So the topic, no, it might be Season 2. So the topics of why she's no longer with the second person she ever dated can be addressed, and why she's not Janeway's Yeoman or something like that. Thus dismissing the, how can she like girls? She was with Janeway, she was with Chakotay, in quote marks, and the Janeway would never abandon Seven, whiners. I'd like to know if, when news was spread that the Romulans were behind the Mars attack, does Raffi's son reconsider his attitude towards her, since it wasn't a crazy conspiracy theory but the truth? I want to see Laris and Jaban and Number 1 again. Shout out for the dog. Maybe the rescue dog playing Number 1 has been trained a lot more since episode 1 and can have more and there can be more interactions with the dog. Would Agnes have to stand trial on Earth or at a starbase, and give Elnor something interesting to do? There's some great ideas there, and I think, again, it's sort of going back to, let's get Janeway in for some Seven exploration. Let's dig a bit more into Raffi and have, some response to the fact that, she has been validated to a sense, as many of these characters have. So, and, following up on Narek, Agnes, that kind of thing. I mean, do you think they'll do that? Do you think they will do some of these dangling threads, or do you think they're going to chart a new course?
Well, Chabon has mentioned that the stuff that he's put in, or they've put in, that they're going to dangle in. So I don't know. I mean, my natural inclination is that the story's going to be different, and we might touch upon elements that have been talked about here. I know I spoke to Darren about the XBs, and it's interesting that even after a couple of days, that when she mention that idea of the Borg cube and the synths actually working together, was that something that Chabon had said, or just an idea that she's got?
Oh, I don't know. I think she might have said that it was Chabon talking about that, but I wouldn't like to say for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I just can't, and it would be good if you had a 26 episode season to delve into that. I just can't see them using all these plots and becoming more convoluted with it. I've just got this feeling that they're going to touch upon stuff. Maybe, XBs, maybe come across one, or have a couple of episodes about something. But I think they'll just go to a different story personally. But I do like all of what she said there. I think that some of the ideas are really, really good, and especially the fact that some of them aren't just bring back Janeway. There is, we need to move the show forward as well as look back, and having certain characters come back in that will facilitate the story. The way that they've treated Deanna Troi and Riker quite well. If they do it that way, then great. I just don't want to go into fan servicey the other way where they're doing it on purpose. But like you mentioned, the Admiral Janeway and Seven conversation would feel natural to talk about.
Yeah.
So
I think it would. I think there are certain fan service things, like you say, like Riker and Troy, which did, even though it wasn't originally a part of the plan, from what we know, it did feel natural and it did work. And I think you could absolutely do that within the context of a broader story. But, the world's their oyster. They can go anywhere, really. Finally, Zach Moore said that I have no idea where the show will go in the second season. For all its faults, the first season finale of Discovery got people excited for it to come back because of the arrival of the Enterprise. What's supposed to be our hook here? There's still a ton of unanswered questions from season 1, but I feel like the show has moved on and has no interest in answering them. We'll see about that, I suppose. For next season, I would like to see a return to Star Trek's optimistic view of the future. More TNG-era characters and not have them get brutally murdered. Picard have more agency in his own story, less gratuitous violence, and a slant toward more individual stories for episodes. Have a season-long arc, but this mystery box storytelling where everything blurs together and there are rarely any satisfying answers is frustrating. I think, I would agree that it would be... I like mystery box storytelling, but I don't know if it always fits Star Trek, really, and I've said that before. And I think it would be nice to have a bit of a balance there. I think you'll always get an overarching narrative. I think there will always be, in all of these shows, under the sort of Akiva Goldsman, Alex Kurtzman sort of banner, I think that's the way they will tell these stories. I don't think you will have episodic television, because most television isn't episodic now anyway, certainly on streaming services that are cable services. It's just not how TV's made anymore. So I don't think you're going to get that happen. I think there will be more optimism, though. I think Zach's wish will come true. I think we've got to a point where we've reached a point with the show where they are all together on that bridge and they can go anywhere, that in theory now you could start rebuilding a level of optimism in this universe. The synths banner's gone. There's that fear from the Federation. Now they know that it was an attack by this sort of renegade sect within the Romulans. That should, in theory, hopefully help the Federation sort of get past this existential fear of artificial life. So you lift that cloud, and in theory, you could end up with a much more optimistic, adventurous, lighter show, actually. And that's kind of what I would... I don't know about you... And this is a good time for you to sort of say what you would like to see in season 2. But that's kind of, I think, where I would like to see it go.
I don't have that much of an issue with some of the darkness that Star Trek has done in the past and on this show, to be honest. It's not something that really annoys me by any stretch of the imagination. Don't get me wrong, Star Trek Next Generation, this optimistic, utopian view is perfectly fine. But I do like seeing some dystopian, I like dystopian movies, I like dystopian TV shows. And I think that you need to find the balance that the aim is to be optimistic, and if it's in a darker world and there's a light beacon within that to try and get to that, to try and attain that, to get back to where we were, then I think that's more fulfilling, because you've got more story to tell, that you've got it has more an effect when things like that happen. So at the end of season 1, the optimism starts to come through and you start to go, this is where I want to be. And it just gives you enough. If you want too much of a good thing, then, that you can come quite blasé with it. And that's the danger, I think, personally. I think that, but I do agree that I think the second season will hopefully be a bit more optimistic than what it has been. But for me, if they do go for a darker edge to it, because they are still a renegade crew as such, because they're not Starfleet, they are a crew that's been thrown together and have found each other. How do they get through there? How does their backstory inform where they're going to go? Is as you said, is the Raffi storyline going to bring them two together? The fact that she's Romulan, the son's wife is Romulan, does that have an effect? Those type of thing. The gratuitous violence I can see the problem with, and I totally get all the reasons why, and you didn't necessarily need to see that, and I don't think that was... As much as I enjoyed it, and it was a bit like, oh God, I can see what you didn't really need to have that. And then, again, like you said, the mystery box storytelling, I love that. I think it's great, but it wouldn't be a miss for me if they went to a more of a arching story. Again, going back to what the book was, these things happen, but events would happening within that overarching story of these challenges that they come across. That's what I would rather see. And I think I do this for a lot of the Star Trek films as well, that I'd rather see a challenge that they're coming across than, an evil, Khan with the exception, but, an evil nemesis in, like Picard's clone, for example. I'd rather see a challenge for them rather than go for this person's bad.
I agree that I think it would be nice to have some sort of balance between light and dark. You don't have to be. It doesn't have to become this, light and breezy kind of show. I don't think it'll ever be that, but I think you could have a nice little contrast between the two. And I think, I think a good example maybe of where, looking back now, they kind of got the balance right between arc and a relative level of episodic storytelling is the first 8 or 9 episodes of Discovery, season 1, where you start off and you have the broad arc of the Klingon Federation War, but they can still tell stories like Harry Mudd coming in, or they can do I think Harry Mudd was in this one, wasn't he? But the whole thing with the time loop story, or Lethe, where you've got Sarek and Burnham's mental connection. They do stand out as their own sort of individual episodes. So you can still have that, I think, within a broader story. So it would be quite nice to see them have the space to then be able to have a broad story and then zip off and do a Seven and Janeway plot, or do a story with Picard and Raffi, or do a, you know what I mean, and do those kind of things within that broad thing. So yeah, I would like to see that too. Let's see what specifically do you want to see then in season 2 going forward?
What I would like to see rather than what I think they would do. I do like the idea of the Borg not coming back as the enemy that we've known them to be, with the Borg Queen and them being the imminent threat sort of thing. But I really would like to delve more into what happened to the ex-Borg, and they are seen as people who are not wanted by the universe, that they're not needed. They're just a pull on society and things, and I'd really like to see more of that. I'd like to see how people deal with that, and what challenges that they come up with there. That's kind of where I would like to see. Not so sure that they will go down that route, but that's what I would like to see. Yeah, I think the adventures, the way that they're bringing in with Seven would tie in quite well with that, and whether or not Elnor is something that we can potentially see more of and develop his character more. I definitely need more of that, and potentially more of the actual Romulan story, but in a different take. Romulan's absolute candor, for example, is a perfect example of wow, it's not my favorite episode of all time. It still has elements within it which could be looked into. That the way that they're dealing with the trauma of the supernova, and more about that as well. So those are my overarching kind of like potentially where they could go for a season-long arc. And as you say, we've had Nepenthe and Stardust City Rag, both were what you were saying about episodes within the actual arc itself. Maybe using 2 out of the 10 episodes to go into a deeper, more emotional charged episodes would be good.
I think there's a lot of logic there in what you're saying. In where they might actually go. I want them to go somewhere else, and I'll tell you where. I want them to go and explore the Klingons for 2 reasons.
Worf.
Firstly, it means you can get Worf in the show and give Worf a good arc to be in there, but not just because of Worf. I think there is a really interesting story to be told with Picard in terms of, because it's always got to be Picard at the centre of it. But if we remember, Picard has got a big connection to the Klingon Empire. He was Arbiter of Succession. He was very involved in Klingon politics like 30-odd years ago, when it was Gowron coming in and Kempek was dying and all this kind of thing, and the House of Duras and all this stuff. Now, where is the Klingon Empire now? Because when we left them, obviously, they were pretty much Federation allies. They were, at the end of the Dominion War, they were helping Starfleet. We don't really know. After that, we don't really know what's happened with those guys. Martok presumably wouldn't be Chancellor anymore, or he's really old. And Worf, we know, was captain of the Enterprise from The Last Best Hope. So presumably he didn't necessarily go off and become leader of the Klingon Empire and all this stuff, which in an alternate sort of world could have happened. So, where are the Klingons now? What position are they in? Are they powerful? Are they still antagonists? Are they in the Federation? Are they linked to the Federation? There's lots of interesting things you could do. And I would love to see a very adventure based story with Picard going back to where he was respected as a warrior, and you could do a really sort of, if he's been reborn, you could do a story with Picard getting involved in the Klingon Empire again and having to prove his mettle. And also, maybe that you could get a really great Klingon bad guy in there. You know, different to, say, to Kuvma in Discovery. And I know Discovery's done a fair bit with the Klingons, so you may not get them in this. But I would like to see where they are in the 24th, 25th century and see their position, because it would be different from Discovery. And I think you could really do a great Picard story in that. And it would give the season a very different texture, potentially, than just carrying on with the Borg and the Romulans. And if anything, then I'd cycle back to the Borg in season 3 and have them come back in force. You know what I mean? Or the last Sirena ends up in the Delta Quadrant or something and has to face, the Borg for real, and actually bring the Borg back then. But I don't know, that's what I'd like to see.
That's that. I would like to see that as a 3-part, finish, that you could have whether or not the Klingon Empire has raised up again, and you've got all the powers of the world. They're not necessarily fighting against each other, but having a real complex thing in season 3 happening. You've got the Klingons, Borg, Romulan, human.
Get them all in there.
And make the 3 seasons almost like a 3 story arc. That would be interesting to do that as a whole. Really, that would be really good.
Yeah, I'd love that, but we'll see. At this stage, we don't know. We've got no idea. They're still writing it. They're still plotting it out. I think they've locked the general story from what we know, but we don't know anything, and we won't know anything for a long time yet. I mean, we record.
Patrick Stewart doesn't know anything either. So.
Yeah, exactly. He's still in the dark, and we're currently in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic as we record this. So they're not going to be filming anything for a good while, I imagine. So it's going to be well into 2021, I think, when we get, everything's getting delayed right now in every franchise. So it's going to be 2021, well into 2021, I think, when we get Picard season 2. So we'll see information, I think, trickling out towards the end of this year and then into 2021, I think. So, we'll be back to report on all that. And I suppose that's a good point, really, Kurt, to talk about the future, isn't it? For us, not just about Picard, because we're not going anywhere, are we? We're gonna stick around.
We're gonna delve into other ventures, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. We're gonna keep the name Make It So, but we're gonna change. This is the last episode that will be Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast. We're gonna become Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast, and we're gonna cover everything that's new in Star Trek world. So we're gonna be talking about Discovery. Our next project will be going through Discovery season 1, episode by episode, and delving into that, and then we don't know when season 3 is coming out, but the plan is to do for season 3 like we've done for Picard, and actually go week by week, react, discuss, and do the same thing, analyse, etc. And we'll see when that comes out. It might be that we start season 1 and then we take a break from that, and then we do season 3, and then we go back to season 1. We don't know, but the plan is to do season 1, season 2 of Discovery, and go through episode by episode. And then we'll be talking about Lower Decks, the animated series, when that comes, presumably later this year, towards the end of the year. And then you'll be back for season 2 of Picard. And then whatever comes next. We know that we believe there's going to be a Section 31 series, frontlined by Michelle Yeoh, which apparently is happening. There might well be a Pike series with Anson Mount in the 23rd century. There might well be things like a second animated series, a Starfleet Academy show. There's lots of rumours going around about what these things are, but Trek is here to stay, and so are we, Kurt.
We are.
Don't we, really?
We are, and no doubt we'll be doing some extras on the patronage as well, won't we?
Yes, we do have our Patreon, which we're going to start putting a little bit of information more regularly in the episodes. We've got 2 patrons right now, and I'm going to name them and thank them as Heimholtz Watson and Colleen Costello. Thank you guys for your patronage. It's fantastic. And we've got loads of interesting possibilities there. So if you go to Patreon, patreon.com/ Make It So podcast, you'll see all the different tiers and all the things we're offering. So we're talking about a patron chat area where we can talk about all kinds of Star Trek stuff privately. We've got early access to episodes just like this one. We've got bonus episodes that we're going to be doing. We've got the chance for you guys to come on and to have actual discussions about Star Trek and come on the podcast and things like that. So there's lots and lots of exciting stuff that we want to do, and we want to build a real community around Star Trek and around Make It So. Much like the one we've done for our X-Files podcast, the X-Cast over over the last few years, Kurt, which is where we met and where we hail from. So it would be great if you can come aboard ship and join us for that, because we've got some exciting plans. And I think we've really enjoyed this, haven't we? I think since we started this journey, I think we've got a lot out of this. It's going to be fun carrying on, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think what will surprise a lot of people is that it nearly didn't happen. So,
that's true, actually.
Yeah,
that's
we
true.
were literally on the verge of we haven't got enough time to do it. I thought about taking it up for a while, thought I haven't got enough time, and then all of a sudden we said, "Oh, we're really excited. Let's do this." And then now we're here. Now we're here, and we're here to stay as well, which is great.
Yeah, we are, because the show's done really well. We're really pleased with the amount of listeners we've had and the amount of people who've tuned in. So thank you, everyone who's supported the show and listened and commented and joined in on chat. We're big Trekkies. We love the fact, we might not be head over heels for every single little bit of stuff we're talking about, but we love this franchise, and it's very, very dear to us, and we just love talking about it. So we hope you enjoy listening to us, and our terrible accents, really. Well, my terrible accents, yours.
No, mine.
Your Brommy was atrocious.
Oh, mine is awful. You
got to work on that. You got to work on that.
I'll find an accent that I can do, and I'll do it well. That'll be my homework, and that'll go on. That'll be on the Patron's site. Just me doing accents all day.
Yeah, that's your challenge. Give Patrick Stewart a call. He does a good French accent, doesn't he?
He does indeed.
Right. Well. We will be back very soon. We're going to try and keep this going on a weekly basis, but we'll see how we get on. We're going to be back very soon talking about the first 2 episodes of Discovery. So that's the Vulcan Hello and Battle at the Binary Stars. We're going to do those in one, and we're going to be talking about that. And then we're going to get some guests on. We're going to have some really exciting guests, people you've heard before, a few new people. So we're really excited to begin that journey and go back to the 23rd century for a few weeks now, which should be fun.
Yeah, it will be.
So yeah, all our details will be in the credits as always, and the fact we're part of the We Made This podcast network, and we'll give you a little bit of a taster about that. What else you can find on the network now? But until then, why don't you do it this week, Kurt? Why don't you sign us off? I'll sit there next to you. I'll be Rios in the chair with the cigar, and you can be Picard behind me saying the immortal word. Why don't you do it?
Okay, we'll set a course and engage.
Previously on the We Made This network. Observing the Pattern, a Fringe podcast.
You're going to meet someone who's quite important now, and this is where we're going. So, I think you're definitely right. And it then it pushes the other episodes, like what's to come, like Bound and Safe, and those episodes, and even Transformation, which we're going to be on in a few episodes' time. It pushes that kind of serialization, which wasn't really there before. There's hints at it, but there is definitely some sort of change that's happening, and this is the beginning of it.
We Buy Records.
Fury Dub's most treasured record is an original UK pressing of Jimi Hendrix' Electric Ladyland. Do you know this one, Paul? Do you know the cover? I think it has
I looked it up yesterday when I was doing research. It's got naked ladies on it too.
It's got lots and lots and lots of naked ladies on it. Now, I didn't know this, but apparently Jimi Hendrix didn't like that cover, and so it was changed, which is one of the things that makes that original really rare. Maybe he was a hashtag SJW in his day. That would be
Who
nice,
knows?
wouldn't it?
The X-Cast, an X-Files podcast.
See, that's the thing. That's the one thing that kind of bothers me about this episode, is that Mulder is he starts off a little too much. You know what I mean? And I feel like he's playing a little hard on this scene. I think if maybe he backed off just a tiny bit, it would have been more of a progression towards madness. But he almost seems a little mad already, but in a different way, in a different sense.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast, was created and is produced and hosted by Tony Black and Kurt North. You can find the show on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard and on Facebook in the Make It So, a Star Trek podcast fan group discussion group. Check out the We Made This network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and on Facebook by typing in We Made This, and you can find all of our shows on our website, www.wemadethispod.com. Thanks for listening.